Okay, in the last part of our mini series on Evergreen, sort of what we're calling the rise and fall of Evergreen, we were in late 2022. So, sort of where we left off was the company point where we had a Voss coin video that had gone out, and we were starting to see orders flood in. Now, Lucas, you'd asked a question about funding, so I guess we got to rewind a little bit into the beginning of 2022 because sort of when I first got pretty serious about being a part of Evergreen, it was in April, March of 2022. That was when I first started to get really interested in the company and working with Dylan. And so, I reached out to some people that I knew, and we landed some money pretty early. So there was a company, a VC called Backend Capital, and they put in one of the first checks into Evergreen. So it was with that first check that we were able to say, all right, let's get James in here, more full time than he had been, and also to bring in some of the team from Irolast. So that early raise that we did with Backend Capital really formed the genesis of the money that we would raise in our pre-seed round, and it helped us throughout all of 2022 to fund operations. Now we raised other money additionally, but that first money in April really helped us a lot to kind of get going. And so we were working off of that first working capital that we brought in throughout 2022, and then in late 2022, when the Voscoin video hits, that's when we started to see our orders exploding. So we were, thinking that we would sell some stuff. I think we launched in like Halloween of 2022, and we thought we'd sell a certain amount, and we were just crushed with orders. I mean, it was kind of we were in some ways crushed by our own success because we had all these orders that came in, and now we had to fulfill them, right? So it's sort of into late 2022 that we had to start seriously thinking about what is our plotting capacity and can we actually get all these units built in a reasonable amount of time to get them out to the hands of customers, because we don't want it to be where somebody orders something and then they have to wait 6 to 12 months to get the unit. We want to try to get it into their hands as soon as possible. So James, you remember those days of sort of late 2022 and coming into 2023? That's, I think, when we just completely took over the Galactex house. Like that's when you basically began to live Evergreen, live, eat, and breathe Evergreen.
That we did. The garage got taken over, pretty much all of the downstairs, but the kitchen got taken over. We did the build out of the server room, so what was two half racks that were upstairs in one of the bedrooms moved downstairs, and we had an electrician come out and wire 220 and what had 8 outlets installed at 220 15 amp and started hooking up 4 racks and had to ramp up our plotting capacity like crazy
And
because
this
yeah
was and
our
this was when GPUs first started coming out too, right?
this was right before the GPU stuff, so we were actually scaling off of CPU, and then um, right when we were about to like make a big increase in our CPU scaling, the first versions of the GPU stuff started to come out, which then we waited for, and I'm super glad we did. That was a great decision. And then yes, we ramped up with the GPU rigs.
So yeah, Lucas, this is where we find ourselves. Not only have we taken on all these orders, but we have to start thinking about how we're going to pull it off. And I don't think anybody has ever plotted anywhere near the amount Evergreen did. We plotted so many drives. I mean, we would ingest, hundreds of drives and plot hundreds of drives, and we were furiously putting these things together. And in all of this plotting, what we started to find out was that we had to significantly up our QA processes, right? Because the worst thing in the world is to go ship some unit and then it has a problem with it. Like, so we had to do a lot of work to ensure that when we were plotting, that we were finding drives that were bad, or if there were problems with the plots themselves, that we weren't shipping bad stuff. So, James, you got to talk a little bit about how much we had to invest in QA.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much we can talk about some of that software. I don't know if it's all public at the moment. But The
Well, I think a lot
process,
of it's public because it was all in the asset list. I mean, some of it's been, like I think there's a line item for it. So
I think what they need to do is actually list all the repos in the in that asset list, because I believe they list like two or three of the major ones, but then it just says the Evergreen repo, which blanket includes a whole bunch of stuff, including some stuff I personally think it shouldn't. But sure, let's talk about it. So we have some. There was automation for the creation of all of the plots and the organization of everything, because we were not necessarily, or at a certain point, we stopped taking farmer keys and plot NFT info from customers. It quickly became almost unreasonable to have to wait for customers to provide that information or expect them to be able to provide it up front. And so, what the solution we came up with was, well, the farmer can support as many farmer keys as we need to, and as long as the wallet that is on the app is what's getting paid, then it doesn't actually matter how many farmer keys an individual unit is hooked up to. So every individual order was getting its own farmer key plot NFT pair. And depending on how the users did that order, it would be a one pack, or maybe if they bought 5 drives, but over the course of 5 months, they would have 5 farmer keys. And so we hit different scaling issues there, and other issues with just kind of maintaining that. But all of the servers had to have this mapping between farmer keys and orders. And then as the drives got pulled out of the servers, they went through a QA station where the drive would get plugged in. There was some scripts on there that would read through the drive, talk out to our order system, confirm that those keys were associated with that order, and if you had like a pro kit, which had 10 of them, it would wait for you to plug in 10 different drives and validate that all of those drives had the same keys and the same everything, to make sure that we were sending the entire packs to the correct people.
and
Um,
also and also some of what we encountered was we would get drives and the drives would be bum drives because we'd try to plot it and we couldn't plot the drive because the drive was faulty.
yep. And so we started adding smart testing and kind of like burn in testing to every single one of the drives when they came in. And then that QA station would also do a check on each of the plot files that it would look at to make sure that it could read them after the fact.
Yeah, because this is the like dirty little secret that we started to learn about the hard drive industry is, you think about most people when they buy a hard drive, they might use 10% of the drive. They get the drive, they plug it in, they put some files on there. How many people actually use the entire drive or do it with any reasonable period of time? They don't. And so, the drive sort of doesn't become a bottleneck. But for us and in Chia, the thing that I think if you're coming to this late or you're just starting to learn about how Chia works, you fill the entire drive. Every single sector gets written to that you can, and you want to try to maximize that. So you want to try and fill the drive completely. And so when we get this drive, we're going to write something to the entire drive. And so if that thing has any bad sectors or has any parts of it that aren't functional, we found out about it. And so what we found out was that there are a significant number of drives that you'll get sent that are kind of bogus drives. And so through our process of plotting them, we would actually find a certain amount of drives that were bad. And so we had to cull that drive out of the mix and put it in. And then if it was a bad drive, if you're plotting 10 drives, you have to make sure that you don't, mix it up, that you don't get it wrong. And that was really critical to our entire process was that, they would get the right number of drives, that all those drives were coordinated, that they were ones that they ordered, and that none of the drives were bad. And then we started to get reorders. So people would order additional drives, like so maybe they would buy the 4 pack, and then they'd want to upgrade to Pro, to have 10 drives, or they would buy 10 drives and then they want to buy another 10 drives. So we started to find where things would fall apart. Like how many drives could you plug into a Raspberry Pi? How many could it farm? And what were the pinch points? So just as we were also scaling our manufacturing processes, we were starting to find what were the limits of what we were producing from a compute perspective. Like how much load did it actually put on the Raspberry Pi? How many drives could you plug in, and what were some of the bottlenecks that came into play? And all of this we were learning as people wanted more and more stuff from us.
And learning some of the stuff is just crazy to even think about. And most people wouldn't, like the difference between a powered USB hub and an unpowered USB hub, and how that affects the ability for you to have multiple drives actually plugged into it. And so yeah, we had to change up, the inventory that we were using or the products that we were shipping out, as we would come across these hardware limitations that were just completely unexpected. And it actually changed our testing process there too, where every time we adopted a new a board, a new computer, because we didn't stick with just Raspberry Pi because of scaling and chip shortages and other issues, we would run that unit on a 30 pack of our drives for weeks before we would actually start using that unit in production.
So you guys were having quality issues and complexity issues as you're getting a huge influx of orders. The same time, as I think about what was
Well,
going
wait a
on
minute. When you say quality issues, we were
with the
finding
drives, with the
yes.
drives.
Well, I mean, quality issues. I mean, I think it's just more of we were finding bad drives. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that we were having quality issues. Like, it's just when you write to all the sectors of a drive, you start to find deficiencies, and some number of drives are always bad. I mean, that's just how it works. Like, if you just go and buy a bunch of drives, some number of them are going to be bad, and that's just the nature of hardware. Hardware is not perfect. Software can have bugs, but hardware can have faults. And I think what this Dylan sometimes would refer to this as the hardware lottery. Like, some pieces of hardware are just a little bit better than some other pieces of hardware because there's some flaw when they run off a whole bunch of them, and so you could get a lot, and then that lot has a flaw in it, and so you might have 10 parts that are bad, and you've got to have some system to be able to sort out the good from the bad. And that's just the nature of making a device that ends up going out to consumers. You have to deal with quality issues. Quality is super important.
Well, yes, and well, I was just trying to lay the considerations that are going on right now, because at the same time that this is happening, the compressed plots are becoming more of a thing in the Chia ecosystem. How did that impact sort of your consideration for what products you were putting out? Were you guys dedicated no compressed plots, or and low energy use, or what
The
kind of conversations did you have?
the compressed plots were actually kind of a godsend for us. It's significantly easier and quicker to produce the compressed plots than it is the uncompressed plots. So for us, that meant an actual speed up in our production. It was a benefit, and we embraced the compressed plots pretty much as soon as we could. The second the technology could handle it, we jumped on board.
But in the early days of when GPUs were starting to be a thing, I think GPUs were able to be used to create uncompressed plots.
They were,
Yeah.
but the compressed plots were still minutes faster. And at the scales we were dealing with, those minutes per plot mattered quite a lot.
So, but when we're talking about early 2023, and I'm going to make sure I don't misremember this, I remember early 2023, we were using GPUs to create uncompressed plots that
We
they
we
had
did.
no centralized tie. So, like, the thing about compressed plots is they're either dependent on your CPU to decompress them, or you have to have a GPU to decompress them. So even when we went after compressed plots, we were still trying to produce units that didn't have a centralized component to them, or at least in the early days of 2023. Because I think we did like what, C3 and C5, the Chia standard.
We started off with C3, and then there were some improvements that I was able to make in the farmer side that allowed the evergreens to go up to C5.
Yeah. So Lucas, as far as the early days of what we did with GPUs, we embraced it for plotting, which allowed us to significantly scale production, which was huge for us. And then, when we first came at compression, we tried to make the unit self-contained. So that was the early phase of our involvement with compressed plots, was to keep the unit self-contained.
Okay, and what sort of effect did that have on the requirements of the Raspberry Pis?
So it meant that you couldn't have just the unlimited number of drives plugged in. If you think about the old uncompressed plots, they put almost no load on the system. So if you're using OG plots, then the nominal requirement for the system is you just go look something up on the drive, so you have a reload on the drive, but you don't have to do any significant amount of compute. When you have compressed plots, now the plot isn't necessarily ready to just participate in consensus. You have to do a little bit of work, and that little bit of work that you have to do puts a load on the CPU. So if you're thinking about like what computer did we have access to, it was a Raspberry Pi 4. And then we started to experiment with the next generation of Raspberry Pi 5. So this is sort of the constraint on the system is how much juice can you squeeze out of that Raspberry Pi to have it work with these compressed plots.
And were you modifying the product that you were putting out? Were you thinking about like the size of the rigs that were going out? At this point, like what sort of gamut of products were you making?
Well, our standard set of products was like a 1 drive, a 4 drive, and a 10 drive. Like those were kind of our bread and butter. And then I think it was, did we move up to
There's
20, I think.
yeah,
was
there's
the
a 20
minimum.
pack.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
So
what was the demand for those? Were people going for the 10 and the 20, or were they going for the 4?
overwhelmingly, I think 10 was like our sweet spot. A lot of people wanted
Yep.
that 10 drive unit.
And the 20 was very popular as well, because it also included the new V2 power supply that we put out.
Yeah, so if you think about kind of what is it like to make one computer and one drive, cabling is no problem. You plug in a couple of cables and you're done. It doesn't look that messy. But as soon as you have a pro kit, right, which is the 10 drives, it can start to look a little messy. You have all these cables in the back. And so, even telling customers how to plug everything in, it should be pretty simple. You just plug the only thing that can plug in into the right spot and then plug it in, and it should be easy, but we found that it wasn't as easy as we wanted it to be. It wasn't as turnkey. So cabling became sort of a thing that we had to deal with, and that power supplies started to get to be kind of a nightmare because you needed to plug the right number of drives into the right number of power supplies, and if you didn't do it the right way, you could have problems.
And what did customer support look in like in that regards? Were because you guys you're in the hacker house. You are you fill the house with the production of these drives. Who's taking those calls? What does that look like?
Well, it was kind of all of us in the early
Yeah.
days. Yeah, everybody did customer support. I think in the later days, I started to do a lot of customer support. I felt like we were starting to have some production quality issues, and I wanted to get closer to it. I had been told by a mentor of mine. I said, "Hey, what makes you a successful CEO?" And he said, "Get to know your customers, get close to your customers." So I felt like taking those customer support calls really helped me be closer to what our customers were feeling and whether we were achieving the goals of quality, coming out of our production facility. And if we weren't hitting those targets, if we weren't making something that was easy to use and turnkey, then we weren't really fulfilling our goal as a company. So I think in the early days, James was jumping on a lot of calls because we were starting to hit some of the things we were talking about, and we didn't know what was going wrong, right? Like somebody would just say, "Hey, there's something happening," and we don't really understand what it is. And then we would investigate it, and then we'd say, "Oh, okay, this is what we think is the problem," which would cause us to rev the software or cause us to rev our plotting process, cause us to make changes in QA. So it was kind of a feedback loop that we found ourselves in to try to improve the product, to improve the processes, and to improve what we were producing, and especially as we were trying to make these bigger kits work.
Yeah, I will say it was definitely a team effort. All of us were getting contacted pretty much constantly. My Discord DM list is easily 99% Evergreen customers at the moment. And it was very helpful for us to actually have that direct communication because as Grant said, we were hitting these issues and we didn't know why. And so being able to dive in there as the developer and debug you know, edge cases that were just happening all over the place was great for us. And we ended up solving a ton of issues. And, most people were very helpful and receptive and just happy to get the device up and running. So it was, in general, a great experience.
So you guys are having all of this, I don't know, physical pressure from creating this product, sending it out, also dealing with the communication issues for getting it going. Meanwhile, I I have sort of two latent issues that I'm wondering about. One, how is the reception with investment going as as you're building and scaling, and also what sort of, you guys talked a lot about the in the first episode, the software heaviness of what was behind Evergreen, and so you have this growing this exponentially growing fleet of drives. What sort of conversations are you having and problems are you dealing with on the software side?
On the software side, I'd say a lot of it had to do with what we're talking about right now. Is if you have a diversity of keys, if you have compressed plots, if you have a lot of drives plugged in, how does that all work? And then we also had to deal with some, variations in hardware. We had started to exhaust the available parts that we were using, and so we had to start to get into parts being made specifically for us. And certain parts that we used from certain vendors were of a certain quality, and then certain parts from certain vendors were of a different quality. And sometimes it introduced field variations that were pretty tricky to deal with. So, on the software side, we're kind of dealing with a lot of this kind of stuff. At the same time, what we're doing on the software side is we started to really want to provide some premium stuff for the units that we're selling. So we wanted to make them like variations, and so we came up with this idea that we would theme the wallet based on what unit that you bought. And so we created some art. And I don't know, James, if you remember this, but like this is one of the things that I thought was the most fun thing that we did at Evergreen was when we made the cards, when we made our NFTs.
The NFT magic styled or magic inspired cards.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
were super cool. So every single box had like a piece of art that was on top of it, and we made these variants. And so we would produce runs of certain of our units, and you got a card with it. And so the card that came with it, on the opposite side of the card had a like QR code on it, and the QR code embedded an offer. And so if you scanned it with your camera, it would claim an NFT, and you could use that NFT to put a little theme inside the Evergreen app, which was super fun. So you could collect different versions of these NFTs, and then the NFTs would also allow you to like have this community aspect where you could claim a coin with the NFT, and then the coin could be exchanged for a different type of NFT, and then you could give that one away. So essentially, if you bought one of our units, you could give your friends the theme that they didn't have. So there was like this trading aspect to it, which was super fun. So this is one of the things that we're doing on the software side is we're embracing cats and NFTs, which were primitives in the Chia ecosystem that were just kind of coming out and maturing. And we were embracing them and sort of incorporating them in a way that was fun and did something within the evergreen ecosystem to try to help build the evergreen community. And also we had these thoughts of something that you could do if you were to collect multiple of these legendary NFTs. And so yeah, we were in a lot of ways inspired by Magic the Gathering. As a collectible card game, we said, well, we want to have collectible cards too. And so we made these different variant pieces of art, and we actually produced the cards, and the card would go in the box. And so when you got the box, you would open it up, and there'd be this card in there. You'd flip it over, you'd scan it with the software, and then it would give you the theme. So you'd be able to see that what was on the box then was an NFT that you had, and then you could exchange it and have fun with other people. So this is the same time we're doing this, and we're also like just really making the software super robust on the back end and starting to scale up our production capacity. I think you asked a question about investment. I would say the investment response that we got was tepid at best. There were a variety of factors that sort of made investment in Evergreen not something that a lot of people were rushing to do. Us being a hardware company was just not something Silicon Valley seemed to have much interest in. They really wanted, SaaS companies. Like this was before this whole AI gold rush started happening. And at that time, the darling of whatever people were doing was all software as a service, and it was all about, what's your ARR? And we were selling devices. We said, we might be able to figure out some kind of a SaaS thing that we could do. And actually, James, I think we should talk about that a bit more later when we start talking about what happened in 2024, because I know that there was a bit of movement in that direction. But at least throughout 2023, we said, there are things that we could potentially do as a SaaS company, but really we make more money as a business from selling hardware. So let's keep selling as much hardware as we can. And, it was harder to get investors interested in that. But in some ways, we were making enough profits that we were paying for ourselves. So we were already like a successful business that was able to stand on its own and pay all of its own bills throughout most of 2023. Like we didn't need a lot of investment. The only time where we started to have issues was when we started to run into debanking issues. We actually got debanked, and it was a big challenge for us in sort of the summer of 2023 because we we had essentially gotten frozen out from some of the financial infrastructure that we were working with because we were making crypto miners, and a lot of people, even though they said that they were super crypto friendly, if you read the fine print, they explicitly excluded crypto miners. So we just had to go through all these different payment processors and different people because we didn't want to just have to make people pay in crypto, which we supported. You could definitely buy one of our devices with crypto, but a lot of what we did, people wanted to just pay in fiat, and so then we had to work with the traditional financial rails, and that was a huge challenge for us.
Well, I wasn't aware that you guys have been hit because of your relation with crypto in debanking. Um, you guys also had the Evergreen wallet. When you were hitting sort of those walls and discussions with the interest in SaaS companies, were you thinking about and you also begin to entertain possibilities with NFT and the reach that you have through the miners and the network that you have that are behind that? Did you ever entertain um, focusing more on the wallet side and using that to lure investment, or was the money good enough in the production of the miners that wasn't that didn't that didn't enter discussion?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. By the way, I threw up some an image of like what the cards look like. So this is the cards we produced. Ask the question one more time because I don't think I really understood what you're asking about the wallet and how it might drive investment.
Well, just as you're having discussions with investors and they say we want to see software as a service, did you think about putting more focus on the wallet and building products out that were using the Evergreen wallet, or were you guys always focused on the physical hardware production?
We experimented with stuff. So like I think we started to dabble in Chia Swap, which was a ability to do atomic swaps, uh, Chia to Bitcoin on the Lightning Network. We actually demonstrated that we got that working within the framework of the Evergreen wallet. I was very nervous about this. I knew what it was like to run a swap infrastructure as somebody who came out of Exodus. I'd worked at Exodus, so I knew what it was like to do swap infrastructure and work with Shapeshift. And so I said, this is something that we could get into, but it's like its own business. And unless we can put that level of focus on it, it's going to be hard for us to be successful in that. So I was not sure that this was something that we could be successful at and continue to produce the consumer electronics that we were doing. So it was something we certainly talked about. We talked, I think, more about making a pool than trying to do swap infrastructure in the in the inside the mobile app. Like it just didn't seem like we could make a compelling business out of it unless we put a lot more focus on it. So then the discussion sort of shifted to should we have our own pool, and is that something that we should get into?
And you guys ended up using a pool. Is that where that went? Or were you using
Well,
someone else's
we used
pool?
FlexPool for a really long time, and then we had to switch. So that when we actually had to launch our own light farmer, that's when we ended up having to select a different pool. I don't know, James, if you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we reached out to a couple of different pool vendors at the time, and we're trying to find a vendor that would be open to working with some of the ideas that we had wanted to implement for our own pool. There were just some features and some special evergreen stuff that we wanted to tie into it. The people who seemed the most open and receptive was Space Farmers. We've had a great relationship with them, and I think for the most part they've been a very active and stable pool. One of the things I do like about them is they do offer their own community nodes. So if for some reason the evergreen nodes do go down, as did happen at the end of 2023, they were able to actually be used as backup nodes, and that was great. I think of the pools out there, they're definitely one of the better ones.
Well, what other things come to your minds in this time as you're scaling up? Um, were there other issues at hand, or is this pretty much you're juggling the things that we've laid out here?
I think it's a lot of this kind of stuff. As we move into late 2023, we started to get some traction on actually putting together a seed round. So we did a tremendous amount of work trying to find the right VC. We thought we had it a couple of times. Like we got really close with a couple of VCs. We actually got to their investment committees, um, had a vote. I mean, we learned so much about how all of this actually works, and I think it was around August of 2023 that we had a VC that was very interested. They had recently completed a raise. They were interested in us as a company, and they said, "Hey, we want to do this. Like, we're going to be your lead." And so they actually put together a term sheet. So we actually had a term sheet in our hands in August, September, and this is where I think kind of the cracks in Evergreen started to come about because they had some terms that were pretty onerous. They wanted some preferential treatment in the way that they would have their position during any kind of an exit, which were owners for the amount of money that they wanted to put in. They had some restrictions about what they wanted to see from the executive team, and so it wasn't a great fit, and it was pretty hard because that was the time when it wasn't obvious how we were going to move forward. Like we really wanted to make this thing work in a bigger way, and we were trying to find the right way forward. It was a time where the price of chia had started to fall. So it was less obvious that there was going to be sustained demand for what Evergreen was going to be able to produce as far as, staying focused solely on chia. And I think that's at the time when Dylan started to think about, well, what other kinds of products might this company be able to produce? And that's when AI started to be a thing. And so, this synthesis of us working with GPUs and starting to have a lot of expertise in GPUs and our seed round falling apart in late 2023, and then starting to have this idea that, well, maybe Evergreen is at its pivot moment. And I don't know how much you know about startup companies, but a lot of startup companies will go through this kind of a thing where you think you've founded your company and done what you think is going to be your long-term success, and then you actually pivot to something else, and then that ends up being the thing that is your true focus of the company, and it ends up being what you need to do in the long term. And so, many people who are well versed in the world of startup companies watch for that pivot. Is it, did we get it right from the very beginning, or do we have to switch to something else? So I think James, that is that matched? Is that track? Do you remember that being kind of late 2023 when the AI stuff started to bubble up?
Yeah, it was right at the end, maybe the beginning of 2024, but if anything, it was like, yeah, December 2023 ish.
Yeah, and December 2023 is actually when I stopped being a part of the company. So I think it was December, like it was in this as the lead, seed round started to fall apart. Dylan and I started to have some tensions between us, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to continuously lead the company. I very much still wanted to focus on Chia, decentralization, and Dylan started to have these ideas of, well, maybe we could do things that are more centralized. We could do, GPUs that were hosted in a specific facility. He started to make some contacts with some people that had some cheap power. And that really harkened back to his early experiences and what he had been doing prior to Evergreen, which was he had been doing things with Ethereum and more high energy mining. And so, this idea that he had access to cheap power opened up his thought process for, well, maybe this is what I can do with the company is latch onto this cheap power that I have access to and start to make some products that can leverage that cheap power and do so with some of the expertise that the company had been building up with with its usage of GPUs and the amount of GPUs that we had and his ability to get access to some GPUs. So I think that that's sort of probably for the next segment of like what happened in 2024, because the early phase of that kind of stuff was coming into his mind at that time is in late 2023, and it's when we started to diverge in where we wanted to take the company. I thought that Evergreen had a good position to really make crypto accessible to a broad populace. This is when I started to work with some people that wanted to do small business type ideas on Chia, and I really wanted to enable that. I wanted to see that flourish, and we very much diverged in our thought process of where we wanted to take the company. He thought AI and GPUs were the right way to go, centralized, high energy. I wanted to go a different direction with decentralized, low energy, and kind of trying to see what we could do to make these evergreen devices do more than they were already doing. I thought that that was what people would find compelling. I looked at things like Umbral and I said, let's do something like this. Let's make these evergreen devices do more than what they're already doing, which is just, mining Chia.
Well, before we get into the pivot, and I think the follow-up episode will dig more deeply into that. A question that also occurs in this discussion about the seed round investment and the interest there. Where is CNI in this time? Are they courting you? Are they giving suggestions? Where did they figure into to Evergreen's relationship with Chia blockchain?
They were they were supportive of us, but not in a financial sense. The only thing that we ever got from Chia from a financial perspective was they supported us with a cultivation grant. It took us a long time to get that cultivation grant. I think Dylan and I worked on a variety of different proposals for a significant amount of time, and I think it was really JM that helped finally get it across the line for us. And so what we got out of the cultivation grant was the light farmer. We've got some offsetting funding that helped us with that, but other than that, we really didn't get a lot of support from CNI. They didn't make a direct investment in us as a company. Nothing like what would come later, in what they did with Silicon.net or anything even along those lines. They never offered us any money like that. We definitely asked them for it, but it just
Well,
we were never able to land it. We couldn't get it across the line.
And James,
not only did they really not offer us much in the realm of support, but we actually had a very frustrating meeting with them at one point where they pulled us in to have a discussion about the Rust library that I had been working on. And they asked if I would be interested in stopping to work on my library and to work on their Rust library instead, which sounded great. And we were like, sure. I mean, what would you pay us to do that? And they said, oh, no, 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 no. For the community.
well, and you mentioned earlier too that there were issues with the parameters that were laid out, with the expectation of the cultivation grant, and that you started to work on a fork in the saw. What happened there? What was their view with what they were trying to get out of Evergreen in that cultivation grant?
They
Go ahead, Grant.
yeah, they had like this vision for one-click farming, which in some ways was not super compelling for us at Evergreen. I mean, like we were making plotting easy. If we were to go hard in the direction that they wanted us to go, it was almost like building a competitor to ourselves. And so we sort of looked at some of the stuff that they wanted us to do and said, we're not sure we want to do any of that stuff. So we didn't really get much beyond building the light farmer of what was in our cultivation grant. I think it was busted into 3 phases, and we only ever got through phase 1.
Yep. In addition, the Chia was not willing to be very flexible with the grant. There were some kind of issues that had come up about just the way the technology was going, and we wanted to take it in a different direction. And at the time, Sargonis was in charge of this, and issues that I had with them aside, they were being very inflexible. So it was the words written down are exactly the way the grant needs to work if you guys want to move forward.
And had they pressed or had GPUs and AI come up in discussions leading into this, or does that all come later?
That would have been later.
Well, let's pick that up in the next episode. And unless you guys have anything to add, we'll get into that in next episode.
Yeah, next episode. So we'll pick this up. So this is late 2023. I've exited the company. I'm no longer actively the CEO of the company. I'm not developing anymore. Eurolast is also no longer working with Evergreen, and so this now is early 2024, and it's sort of the next phase of how does Galactex and Evergreen work without Grant and Eurolast being in the mix. So that's where we will pick up and talk about what has happened in 2024 and how do we find how does Evergreen find itself selling off its assets and potentially shuttering. I'm not sure if it's going to shutter, but like selling off its assets and doing something else. So yeah, that's where we'll have to pick up part 3.